We are calling to order the Planning and Zoning meeting for October 23rd. Before we begin, we have some new members on our board. One of them's not with us this evening. Mr. Don Hamilton, will say hello to him next time, but we have Sherry Courtney on the far right of our board panel here. Welcome to your first meeting with us. And
thank you.
Glad to have you aboard. Well, the first thing we do, as always, is adopt our agenda or amend it if necessary. I would be interested in hearing any changes to the agenda. If not, would I have a motion to adopt?
I would like to propose one change.
Yes, go right ahead.
I would like to, in the new old business section, just simply swap the order of number 3, board and work plan goals, with reviewing the calendar. Just swap the order.
So that would be 132?
132.
Is there a second to that change?
Second.
Any comment on that? Or if not, all those in favor of adopting that agenda change, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no, please. That motion carries. We have a new agenda order. Anything else for that? Or we can move on to the regular minutes for the meeting of September 25th. Are there any changes or edits? If not, would I hear a motion to adopt those minutes, please?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That motion also carries unanimously. This evening, we have one case with a public hearing, and we have one case without. Before we begin our public hearing, I'll go through the rules just very briefly. Our staff person, Ms. Gruber's up there with us right now. She will present this case to us, and when she is finished, I will open the public hearing. At that time, we will have our applicant speak first. The applicant will have 10 minutes. When the applicant is done speaking to us, we then have the public hearing open to any of you who wish to come down and speak with us. You will have 5 minutes when you come down. I would like you to please fill out a card and hand to our clerk before you come speak to us. If you don't have the card ahead of time, that's okay. You can do it immediately thereafter. I would like you to come to the podium that is currently unoccupied, not the one Ms. Gruber's at, but the one to her left. And that one is the one I'd like you to use because it has a timer which will help you out quite a bit. The 5-minute time period is shown on that timer. 4.5 minutes, you'll have a green light. The last 30 seconds, you'll have a yellow. And then when you get the red light, you get the hook. And we will ask you to stop pretty much right after that so we can give everyone the same 5 minutes to speak. There's some, I don't have a big crowd here, but sometimes when we do, we have people sort of tag team where each person coming down, if you're part of a group, will address one point. That way you have more time and it doesn't get repetitive and people don't say the same thing. So if you have that sort of thing going on, by all means you can do that. You can have one spokesperson for the whole group. Say, I'm representing all these people, and everyone stand up. We see that happen quite a bit, and that seems to be pretty effective. We are going to be really strict on that time limit, and another thing we're going to be really strict on is we're not going to go back and forth with you. It's a hearing in every sense of the word. We're going to hear what you have to say. We're not going to interact with you. We're going to assume any question you ask us is totally rhetorical and doesn't command a response. When you have your 5 minutes up, then you can go back to your chair any way you like. When we're finished and everyone has had a chance to speak to us, we will then end the public hearing. At that point, we will ask questions of the staff or of the applicant. But if anything comes up that you spoke to, we can't interact with you again. So you get your 5 minutes, and that'll be that, and then we'll go forward with the case. Have I missed anything? If not, we will proceed with 17 REZ 07, and that'll be our public hearing case for the evening.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a rezoning request for 0.19 acres in downtown Cary. The subject property is located between East Chatham Street and Waldo Street at 110 Urban Drive. The zoning for the property dates back to 2001 when Town Council adopted the Town Center Area Plan. So the existing zoning for the site is Town Center Medium Density Residential. And that category includes housing densities between 4 and 8 units per acre and can include single-family detached and semi-detached units, townhomes, duplexes, and triplexes. The applicant proposes to change the zoning to Town Center mixed-use conditional use, and mixed use indicates a mix of commercial office and medium to high-density residential uses. The residential uses permitted in this district include townhomes, semi-detached or attached dwellings, and multifamily dwellings, and the maximum density is 25 units per acre. So the difference between town center medium-density residential and town center mixed use is the density. Both have the same maximum building height of 45 feet, and again, the MDR density is 8 units per acre, and the MXD density is 25 units per acre. The applicant has offered 5 conditions. The first one that's italicized was included since the beginning of the case. The applicant has added conditions 2 through 5 since the town council public hearing. So the first condition is to limit the use to townhouse multifamily dwelling or neighborhood recreation center, so that takes out the commercial and office in the mixed category. The second condition is to divert storm water into the existing system within Chatham Street. The third condition is any townhomes with frontage on Urban Drive will have a primary entrance on Urban Drive. The fourth condition is the provision of a solid fence or wall between 110 and 114 Urban Drive. And the last condition includes some architectural elements, such as 35% masonry for any front or side of a building facing Urban Drive, and then no vinyl siding except for soffits or architectural accents. At townofcary.org, you can check out our interactive development map, because there is a lot going on in downtown Cary. A zoom in to where the subject property is. You can see the property shown in, I guess I kind of call it an iris color, the purpley color. Those are development plans in review right now. So adjacent to 110 Urban Drive is a development plan in review for Chatham Walk condos. It's proposed to be a 4-story building with 33 units. This is a staff level review. The zoning and entitlements are already in place, so no council approval is required, and those plans are available at townofcary.org. So our Cary Community Plan sets our vision and values and helps us to achieve our desired future. Whenever a rezoning request comes in, we look at the Cary Community Plan and analyze the request based on the policies found in the plan. And some of the policies that stand out for this case come from the Shape and Live chapters. So for the Shape chapter, key policy is facilitating infill and redevelopment, and that is something that this case furthers. And also a policy in the Shape chapter is providing appropriate transitions between land uses, and that's something also very important to this case. This request does meet the vision for the central Chatham area. We'll see a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the Live chapter, or a housing chapter, notes it's important to add variety and have different housing choices. And this case does add another housing choice to this area. So the future growth framework map found in the Imagine Cary Community Plan designates downtown as a special planning area. And downtown is further divided into 5 sub-districts, with Central Chatham being Cary's Main Street. You can see the site is located in the Central Chatham area. So the vision for Central Chatham includes a walkable mixed-use corridor and a supporting neighborhood area. So these pictures are from the community plan, and the photos on the right side with the green strip on the side show potential character for a supporting neighborhood type development. Our Parks and Recreation and Cultural Resources Master Plan shows proposed greenways in the area. Our Comprehensive Transportation Plan, or the MOVE chapter in the Imagine Cary Community Plan, designates East Chatham as an existing major thoroughfare. And we do have a Go Cary and a Go Triangle route on East Chatham Street. The site is not directly impacted by stream buffers. Back in March, we had a neighborhood meeting for this rezoning request, and we had good attendance. And the main theme that came out of that was the neighbors in the area are very concerned about preserving the character of their street and their area. Gotten several calls and emails, not recently, more towards the beginning of the case. People wanted to make sure they understood the process and the timing of everything, and some people shared concern about decline in property value. And we also received some comments about stormwater and flooding. At the Town Council public hearing back in June, 13 people spoke against this request. Again, their concerns are about neighborhood land uses, potential declining property value, more traffic, and possibly more flooding. And 4 people spoke in favor of the request. They've mainly focused on the synergy between more residential development and supporting downtown businesses in our great downtown area. So staff's preliminary recommendation is for approval, and that is based on the consistency with the Imagine Cary Community Plan in the downtown special planning area. And also, it's important to point out that both the current zoning district and the proposed zoning district both allow townhomes. Notification of this request, both the initial public hearing and then this public hearing tonight, was sent to properties shown in yellow on this map. And following the public hearing, the board may make a recommendation on this case and send it to council. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gruber. We are opening the public hearing. As I said earlier, the applicant will be the first person to speak.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the applicant. Here with me tonight is Mr. Ed Tang of Withers and Ravenel. If you guys have engineering questions related to the site, even though this is just a zoning, but if there are engineering questions, we are mostly prepared to answer those, recognizing that we're really early in the entitlements process. Meredith did a great job of describing the request, and the staff report does an excellent job of not only describing the request, but also doing a deep dive into what the Cary Community Plan calls for in this area. Overall intent, maybe not something that's clear from the application, as Meredith indicated. The Chatham Walk condominium project has already been submitted for review and approval. That is a staff level approval, no zoning is required. The entitlements are already there through the MXD zoning for that use. The intent behind this zoning case is to entitle this site for more than one townhome building so that it can be incorporated into that development. And my clients are working with the owners of that adjacent site to have essentially that delivered as one comprehensive project. One of the clear benefits behind that to each of the owners of the condominium project, but also the town and the area residents, is that Meredith alluded to it, and it's mentioned in the staff report, by entitling this site for townhomes, it provides kind of a softer edge to the condominium project. The condominium project is planned for 4 stories in height, and this would be, certainly smaller in scale, would provide essentially a single townhome building adjacent to that development, again, to try to ease the transition as you get into the neighborhood. So that is kind of the big picture, what the plan is, and not surprisingly, let's see if I can, the intent is to have the building essentially kind of in this direction here, and with it facing inward to the site. So Meredith did an excellent job of noting something, what I would say is what this case is not. And what this case is not is a referendum on whether townhomes should be built on this site. Townhomes are already permitted. Nothing about townhomes being a permitted use. It's also not a referendum on the height of structures that can be built on that site. As Meredith, as the staff report notes, and as Meredith has noted in her presentation, the permitted height of buildings in the MXD district and the MDR district are the same. And so I think that's important for you all to understand. I understand there has been a lot of consternation in some of the surrounding areas about not wanting townhomes, not wanting buildings of a certain height. That groundwork was essentially laid by the town when this area was rezoned in the early 2000s. I mean, this process for essentially, for the redevelopment of downtown, for these areas that are older to start to grow up a little bit, that process started a long time ago with the town, and this is really kind of the realization of the efforts that the town has put into making downtown a more interesting place to be. As Meredith indicated, the public hearing was attended by a number of people. There were a number of concerns that were raised at that hearing, and my client heard those concerns loud and clear and took it upon themselves to add additional conditions to the rezoning proposal. Just want to touch on a couple. There was concerns associated with, folks wanted a fence along the southern boundary of the site, so a condition has been added requiring a 10-foot fence along the southern edge of the site. There was questions related to architecture, and so there has been a condition added requiring commitments associated with masonry that the town currently doesn't have the authority to to impose on townhomes that could be developed on that site today. And there was also a question about the end unit, wanting to make sure that the end unit of any building that abutted Urban Drive essentially addresses Urban Drive, and that's included in the conditions. And then finally, really the big one, you know, if you heard the public hearing, and I trust that Chair Evangelista was there, he's there at all of them. If you were there at the public hearing, the big issue was stormwater. And as you all are well aware, for folks who have been on the board for a while, it's really not the role of an applicant in a zoning case to fix an existing stormwater problem. The town has fairly rigorous stormwater standards as of today. They might not have had those, you know, when the situation that has created these problems was, you know, came to be. But today, the town has very strict stormwater regulations, and they do a great job of imposing those. It would have been easy for my client, for the applicant in this case, to say, that's, you know, if there are existing stormwater problems, that's not our fault. We will take care of ours, and we'll let the town or whomever figure out the rest. The concerns associated with stormwater were such that we didn't feel that was a responsible answer. We didn't feel it was an appropriate answer. And we had the opportunity, because we're working with the adjacent developer, to figure out, I won't say a solution, far from it, because the solution is far more reaching than any single zoning case could handle. But what we have done is craft a condition that essentially sends our stormwater, rather than sheeting it down Urban Drive, it sends it up to Chatham Street. And so in concert with the adjacent developer, and the plans that have been submitted for Chatham Walk show a stormwater facility in this area that actually drains back up to Chatham Street and into the storm drain that's in Chatham Street. And so we have committed to a condition that will require our stormwater to do the same. And that is, we will send it to their stormwater facility, and it will go up to Chatham Street. And again, we recognize that is a far cry from addressing the drainage concerns that the folks who live in that area have as of today, but we feel like it is the responsible thing to do, it is the right thing to do, and I believe it's a compelling reason why a case like this should move forward with approval. Ultimately, I believe, and my client believes, our team believes, that what is before you tonight strikes the appropriate balance. And that is the balance between what the Cary Community Plan calls for, and that's a 30-year vision. That's a long-range looking vision of what does the town look like in 30 years. And it balances that versus what is on the ground today. And what's on the ground today, as you all are aware, Chatham Street is redeveloping, but what is on the ground today as you head down Urban Drive, you know, are ranch-style homes. And we believe by rezoning this to permit townhomes that will be incorporated and integrated into the Chatham Walk development provides for the right transition, and it strikes the right balance between where we want to be in 30 years and where we are today. And so with that, we're here to answer any questions that you all might have, and we respectfully request you all's favorable recommendation of the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barham. The applicant's finished, so now we will take anyone in the audience who wants to come down and speak to this public hearing.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Landon. The plans for Chatham Walk show a 4-story condo along Chatham, but the structure extending down Urban looks like parking, figure A. If I counted correctly, there are 29 spaces. Since Chatham Walk is advertising 33 condos, I'm assuming it may be a 2-story parking structure. If so, could you please explain how 3-story townhomes proposed for 110 Urban is a transition? Current residents are concerned about water runoff, soil erosion, light and noise pollution, and increased traffic. The proposed changes at 110 Urban will not transition those consequences either. They'll make them all worse. Regarding water runoff, many people mentioned at the last meeting the higher than normal rainfall in recent years. No one brought up climate change. Our rainfall is increasing at a consistent rate, figure B. So are the calculations for water runoff using the higher rainfall amounts probable in the future or the historic rainfall levels? So the proposed rezoning does not create a visual transition and potentially worsens all the impacts from the Chatham construction. I'm not seeing the logic. The only thing that makes sense to me is that if this plan is just the beginning, an inroad to the entire block or neighborhood. I would like some clarification on future plans for our neighborhood. The original maps of downtown redevelopment showed my neighborhood, Forest Park, designated a heritage neighborhood. I'd hope that that meant there'd be protection from gentrification, perhaps benefits for renovating these homes, but that map, the one that sold me on the redevelopment, has disappeared. I've searched online, visited town hall, and contacted various Town of Cary employees. The only remnant I found was used at the last meeting. I took a screenshot from the video archive, figure C. The new maps shift the label to supporting neighborhood. What are we supporting? Business. To me, though, this sounds like our roles have morphed from community members to mere consumers. Which leads to my next point. Bigger houses and denser housing mean more people with more money. The examples of supporting neighborhoods shown at this meeting indicate townhomes, condos, and 3-story single-family homes, figure D. Currently on Keener Street, 1,000 square foot older homes are being demolished to make way for 3,000 square foot multi-story houses that in no way fit the current architecture, even though the Shape Downtown document points out the need to, quote, develop alternative zoning and design standards for the town center historic core to ensure compatible infill development and to reinforce traditional design patterns, end quote. Any historic character Keener Street had is gone. What's the future for our homes? Should we be investing to preserve our homes' charms, or should we let our homes decay because they'll just be demolished in a few years? The historic evaluation of our neighborhood, recommended and described in the Historic Preservation Master Plan in 2010, was never done. Why? I'm not opposed to development, and I welcome the new neighbors at the Chatham condos, but this rezoning request is not about facade improvements, streetscapes, or replacing long abandoned structures. This is about demolishing a home and potentially destroying a historic neighborhood you can never get back. Residents have poured heart, soul, and money into our homes. We value the history of our neighborhood. Forest Park is Cary's first subdivision. The greatest generation lived in our homes. My home was owned by Paul Matthews of the Matthews House, Matthews. He was a volunteer firefighter for Cary. I believe his wife was Cary's switchboard operator in the 1950s. The switchboard is in my attic, and my house has a ridiculous number of very weird phone plugs. I'm positive that my home is not the only one with a link to Cary's history. Consider the benefit to downtown redevelopment if a few historic neighborhoods were preserved and restored. They're places to walk and breathe. They're a connection to our past. Our neighborhood is not a supporting neighborhood. It is the heart of Cary. Thank you.
Thank you. May we have our next speaker, please?
Hello. I'm Janet Sarl Couture. I grew up on Urban Drive. My husband and I live in 113 Urban Drive, which we are restoring. That was my grandparents' home. At the last board meeting, we pleaded with the board not to change the zoning there. There was a petition I handed in at that board meeting with 26 signatures of people in the neighborhood saying, we don't want the rezoning. And yet, here we are again. We hear also the board directed the developer to provide a sketch of both buildings that were going up so they could see what they look like. Still don't see that. We have no idea what these structures will look like. The driveway, or the entrance and exit, will be right in front of my neighbor's driveway. We're talking about townhomes that are allowed in the present zoning, but they're talking about 5 townhomes. Present zoning doesn't allow that many townhomes. We also don't, as I said, we don't know what these structures they're proposing will look like, but I do know they'll be much taller than anything else on our street because everything's a bungalow. We're renovating our bungalow that was built in 1946. Our neighbor, our future neighbor, has renovated the Dawkins home, who I grew up next to, and she has, both her and her husband have put in a lot of money into their new home, as we have. Our value has gone from $175 when we purchased it from my mother to over $260 some, and probably more at this point. Townhomes across the street next to bungalows all the way down Urban Drive will not look nice. It will take away from the community. I know they're talking about brick and this and that, but it's not that kind of neighborhood, and it never will be again once those condos go in. The height of those buildings will have people looking down on us. Behind us on Cedar Street has already, which don't really mind because the house that was there was falling apart, they're going to be putting in 3 new homes. We don't mind new construction. We're fine with that. We just don't want a townhome condo community coming in and taking away the character of our neighborhood. That's all. I'm a realtor. I'm not against construction, new construction. I sell homes. That's what I do. But I do see it important to the value of my property not to have a townhome directly in front of me and next to it a condo building with parking lots. We already have trouble with traffic. We already do. Speeders. I mean, I understand what's happening in Cary. I've lived here all my life. My family's been here since the 1930s. People move here because of the small town atmosphere. They love this area. They love the new look of the downtown. But we're looking at ruining some of the most precious neighborhoods. If this were going on in Russell Hills or around Cary Elementary, I don't think you would approve this. We're a little bit down the street. Maybe we're like the redheaded stepchild. But we have a beautiful neighborhood, and it was the first neighborhood. And all those people that made Cary what it is lived on these streets, and their children are still there. I'm still there. My mother's house is 2 doors down. My sister lives there. You know, I feel like we're being invaded, and we can't do anything, and we all ask you, please not to approve this rezoning. And if a house is going on there, does it have to be 45 feet tall? And there's no setback requirements. They can have it right on the street. I mean, I know this is what the town envisioned, but is it not a working document? Can't we change it? I don't know what else to say other than nothing's changed. The petition that was turned in said no, and we still say no.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hello.
I'm Donna Clark, and I live at 111 Urban Drive, which is next door to Janet and Don, and 2 doors up from Deborah when they move in finally. I know there's nothing we can do about the 33 condos. I know that's a given. It's going to happen. I've lived in that house since 1987, and I love Cary. I love being able to walk from my house down to Crosstown Pub and eat, or the pizza place. I love being able to walk back and just experience the life in Cary. And I think it's awesome that all the stuff is happening downtown. And I'm not against progress. I'm not against it at all. I love the things that are happening. But I just hate to see my neighborhood turn into a multiplex of people and cars and buildings and all that. Like I said, I know the condos, it's going to happen. As far as the townhomes, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but 0.19 acres of land is not a whole lot of land to put 5 townhomes on. But, you know, I have seen things happen like that, like the tiny houses and things like that. But anyway, I'm begging you not to rezone that property. The people that live there currently are renting from the owner. They're wonderful people. They got 2 little girls, and they're going to have to move. And I hate to see that. So basically, we're talking 4 stories of 33 condominiums, and then townhomes, and then right across the street, my house was built in 1947, and everything's 1 story, and we have a great little neighborhood, and we love it. And I just would ask you to think about if you lived in my house, if you lived in Jane and Don's house, would you want this happening on your street? If you lived within 5 minutes of walking to downtown Cary, would you want all of this happening right across the street from you? You could throw a rock. So I'm asking you to just answer that to yourself. And I appreciate you listening, and I hope you will consider our petition, because we put a lot of work into making some signs and all kinds of stuff. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here this evening and listening to our cares and concerns. My name is Deborah Mueller, and my husband and I are in the process of renovating 117 Urban Drive. And so we've talked a lot about, so I'm not going to kind of repeat what others have said, but just to point out that current zoning would allow for 1 townhome in that 0.19 acres, and the rezoning request is to put 5 there. So again, just to reiterate what Donna talked about, that's a lot of building going into a very tiny space. I want to talk to you about what our vision was. We purchased this property in November of last year. And when we went about looking at the designs, what we were thinking, we took great care in ensuring that what we were doing would enhance the neighborhood, and it would add to the charm and the character of the bungalows that are already along the street. So you can imagine we're not very happy to see that there are townhomes that are potentially going to be directly across the street from us. We've poured a lot of time, effort, and money, and it feels like it's been a neighborhood project because we've had a lot of views and perspectives that people have offered on our home. So I would just ask that you consider, I appreciate that the applicant and their views and perspectives, but we've already bought and in the process of renovating 117 Urban Drive, and we sort of like the bungalow look and feel like that kind of rezoning that particular property becomes a tipping point, and that it does sort of start to detract from the historic feel of the single family dwellings that are on the remainder of the street. So thank you again for your consideration, and I would just respectfully ask that you not approve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for your time. My name is Ken Mueller. I will be moving in with my wife on 117 Urban Drive, and I will try to be brief because she's much brighter than me and has already spoken. But First, I really do understand, and we all understand the balance that the council needs to achieve between growth and what you're trying to do and advance the planning of the neighborhoods. But, from our perspective and just what, Deb and I have done, we've made a very significant personal investment in the community. It's a personal investment. And the townhomes are just an investment. My concern is around this talk of transition and the need for a transition, which it just doesn't seem logical to me. It'd be like saying that the PNC Arena, we need to build that as a transition to Carter Finley Stadium. No, that's called an addition. That was expansion of how the property was going to be used. And that's the path that we would be going down. And it simply fails the test of reason. There's no reason to put those 5 townhomes in that 0.19 acre, as you have heard more than once. But it does, more than anything, it just sets a bad precedent on what the community is and where it's going. I understand the need for density. The issue is, does that density need to be on 110 Urban Drive? And then does it need to be next door and next door? And then you will totally change the nature of the community. All 3 of the Chatham properties went between $450,000 and $500,000. And that's not what you're going to want to see on 0.9 acre or 0.2 acre. So again, I understand the balance you're trying to achieve, but I respectfully ask that you do not approve this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would also like to ask you to not approve the zoning change. I just think it's the wrong property for what is trying to be done. There's not a huge demand at this point for townhomes in downtown Cary because there are a lot of projects coming up. There's townhomes already available for sale. I think it's the wrong place to have them, and especially if it's 45 feet high. There was no talk too about landscaping, and I also was disappointed not to see a picture of what is proposed, especially even at the first public hearing. There was no plan. I thought it was just going to be joined in with the property on the corner. I thought that was going to be the eventual thing to have happen, but it seems like there hasn't been a plan. At least it's been moved forward with what's been suggested. And the person mentioned that it was a 10-foot tall fence. That says 6. I don't know that a fence is really going to make that much of a difference when you're talking about a 45-foot tall building. And as someone has said, imagine yourself, this is your house, you're living in a 1-story house, and you have 4 stories or even 3 stories built right beside you, right up to the property line. That's not a transition. So I would ask you to look at that part of the transition to, if some big trees are being cut down, some nice trees, like spend some money and bring in a 50-foot tall tree, not just a little 12-foot tall tree. Bring it, if you're gonna do this, and require some serious landscaping to create some sort of a buffer, but I really would like you to not approve this request. You've got so many things with the corner property down in the park. There are plans for condos there. Further down Chatham Street with the where Hustle is, the gym right there at Harrison and Chatham. That's going to be some condos as well as office and retail. So you've got a lot of things in the works. I don't see that 5 townhomes are going to be making or needed in that particular spot. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers? I see someone coming.
Hello, good evening. Don Couture from 113 Urban Drive, and also speaking to ask to not approve this zoning request. I'm a builder, home, residential, commercial remodeler. I think there's some wonderful things going in that are happening in downtown, and there's many improvements, and It's based on the vision that was done in 2001. We understand what's happening going to happen at the corner. If you stood down there and just looked from the vision of that street and looked at the piece of property that we're talking about, that right now can put 1.5 condos on it, townhouses, I'm sorry. If you looked at the side of that, just standing there looking at that piece of property and went, okay, there's one unit that's going to be turned towards the road and 4 more behind it with a driveway going up the side of it, you'd go, how is, just from a rational point of view, you'd go, how is that all going to fit on that and not, I mean, it's pretty an impressive 45-foot structure, and the whole site developed on 0.19 acres. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse or anything. This is just not a big piece of land. And the other thing is and people have mentioned that also, is precedent. This was done in 2001. I know this is being considered to move up to the next level. Then there'll be 5 allowed on that piece of property. And we've already heard the person next door is already afraid. They're already going, okay, my little 1-story ranch, I'm now looking 45 feet up. I'm going to get out. It just creates that domino effect, which, and I am not against the things that are happening on the street, on the main street, and the need for, moving the density up and getting more, more residents in the town who want to live in downtown. But it's just, it just doesn't make sense from a size of a lot, in my opinion, as well as that person next door who all of a sudden goes, well, it's time for me to get out. The big buildings are coming. What stops that next person from doing the same thing? And there's nobody that can tell me, well, it's going to stop right there at that. Why can't it go right next door to this person who's now been scared out of that spot? And now he sells, and that is now being asked for to be rezoned for the same scenario. That might be a bigger, piece of land, and it just doesn't create the look that has been established in that historic area. So anyway, that's my appeal for asking to not approve, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other speakers? All you got to do is wave your hand or stand up or anything to give me an indication. All right, I don't see anyone else coming forward, so I'm going to close the public hearing. We will now ask questions of the staff and the applicant. And why don't we just start off on the left side of the room. You have any questions of our
Oh, I did.
applicant? Of course you do.
But I'd really like to share the floor with some other folks, though, first. They may cover a few of the topics.
All right, fair enough. We'll go to this side and
Thanks, Victor. So I am very sympathetic with the folks up there, but I understand that the downtown Cary area is going to be changing, and I think that they understand that too. My concern is about the transition, because that's a tall building amongst smaller homes. I was wondering if there's any reason why we're going with townhomes instead of something that might be a little bit more appropriate height-wise in that area.
I'd probably let the applicant answer the part about townhomes versus something else. I have, if we want to talk a little bit about transitions, I do have some slides in reserve that show some different ways of making transitions that are in the Imagine Cary community plan. If we want to take a look at those, maybe we can talk a little more about how that transition could or could not be made. If that sounds fair. In Chapter 4 of the Imagine Cary Community Plan, at the end of that chapter, there's some information about making transitions, because with infill and redevelopment comes the need to make good transitions. And when you have a charming neighborhood like you do on Urban Drive, you do want to make an appropriate transition between that and new development on Chatham Street. So this slide shows a way to make a transition with form. This is Carpenter Village in Cary. You can see the multifamily is labeled, and then there's a smaller lot, appears to be semi-detached across Carpenter Town Lane, and then you see the larger lot, single family. So these are residential units that are close together, and by going from the larger building block down to the smaller building block, that makes a transition. You can also make a transition with use. This shows Cornerstone at the southwest corner of Davis and High House. The shopping center transitions to multifamily and then single family. This obviously has more space than what we have to work with Urban Drive. Architecture can also make a transition. We have a larger building, mixed-use building going to townhomes with single family across the street. Having the street there and the townhomes create a transition between the larger building block and the single family building block. Then another way to make a transition, the way we're probably used to with typical suburban development, is with a buffer. So you can see the landscape material between the single family neighborhood and the arboretum. And we don't have that much space. So the two that seem the most similar to Urban Drive are form and architecture. Let me make sure I'm going back to your, make sure I'm getting your question, Cary. So you're asking why townhomes there in between the bungalows and the condo building. Having something like a townhome is something that's a mid-size between those two blocks. So yes, it seems like a small space, but that would make a transition versus having just the bungalow home and then the large condo building. That could be challenging. I'm not sure if the applicant would like to add anything or not, or if it's up to you.
I think Meredith hit it on the head, and that is, I mean, I think one of the things that we have heard during this process is a concern of having a single-family home next to a larger building. And so the benefit of the townhome building is it is smaller in scale as compared to the condominium building. If we were to do something else, if we were to do single-family on that, it would produce the same result that people are complaining about right now, and that is they don't want a single-family home next to a much larger scale building. So townhomes, by their very nature, as Meredith touched on, are kind of transitional uses in general.
Okay, thank you.
What else?
Any other questions?
I don't think so, not at this time.
Well, let's just keep on rolling down the line.
Sure, Meredith, a couple questions, more not specific to this, to the piece of property and before us tonight, but in the area together, particularly downtown. Do you have any idea, maybe you don't have this at your fingertips, but what the breakdown is as we look at the housing stock in this area between one is owner occupied versus rental, and the rental being single family versus, let's say, duplex or beyond? Do you have any information on that?
I don't have that, but it's ironic. I was in a meeting earlier today where we were talking about what kind of data would be useful in looking at neighborhoods and having strong neighborhoods, and that is something that came up that we're looking at.
Okay. Well, I guess it follows up with my next question would be information about the demographics, particularly as we look at the downtown and the special planning area, not only just existing home ownership versus and also rental, but also what the demographic would be, let's say, in terms of income. Is there any data on that in terms of, as I look at this area, let's say, to compare it to other parts of Cary, just knowing what, Cary's overall demographics are in terms of age, education, income, but begin looking at what is it specific to this area?
I don't have any of that at my fingertips. We do know that some of the heritage neighborhoods inside the Maynard Loop are clearly more affordable than northwestern Cary, but that is something we'd be happy to follow up with.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. I really think it'd be for the applicant. Just a couple of things. Since it was brought up, and I know we're here really to talk about a rezoning request, but since the Chatham condos have come up multiple times, you brought them up. It's kind of I think it's a fair topic now. Was there any thought to delaying this and bringing this forward once the approval was given or not given for Chatham Walk? Are you keeping them, because you mentioned you were trying to time together, but you're bringing this forward, and
Well,
just your thoughts on that.
They are already in for plan review. They're almost ready to be approved. I mean, one of the reasons why we wanted to move forward on both fronts was so that everybody had a kind of the complete picture. We didn't want to file the zoning case in isolation because it really doesn't, It doesn't give you, when I say in isolation, didn't want to file the zoning case and not have a site plan going through the process because it doesn't give you kind of an accurate picture of what is coming. But we weren't going to join them at the hip necessarily because the condominium building doesn't need a rezoning, and it's a different ownership. I mean, my client doesn't own that building.
Okay. How will, since I don't have a picture to look at, how will the parking be? Is it under, is it behind, is it, do you have any idea how the parking would be? Or maybe there was a picture and I missed it.
Meredith, do you want
I
to?
don't have a picture of the site plan. This shows the outline of the area. I don't know if it'd be helpful to,
There's structured parking, from what I understand. Structured parking kind of contained within the building as well as some surface parking on the site.
Okay, so people really shouldn't need to park on Urban Drive. I know that's possible, but there's going to be on-site parking.
Yeah, there will be on-site parking to satisfy the ordinance requirements for that. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's all I had for right now.
Great.
Thank you.
Good evening, Ms. Gruber. I have a few questions. My first is in regard to buffers. Can you clarify what the buffer requirements are for the proposed MXD and what they would be for the existing MDR zonings?
let's see. I have setbacks and,
Actually, if the setbacks, that was going to be my second
Okay.
question, so.
let's see, for MXD or MDR or both?
I would prefer both.
Both, okay. For MXD, there is no required front, side, or rear setback. And for MDR, let me make sure I'm getting the right column. Third one over. The front is 10 feet unless there's a driveway, then it's 18. And the side is minimum 16 feet between building groupings. And then the rear is 10 feet.
Okay. And do you have the buffer requirements on those as well?
I do not. I can see if one of my colleagues can help with that.
Excuse me. Within the town center district, there are no buffers required. So there's, unlike suburban development where you have the A, B, and C buffers between uses, because the town center district is intended to have a mix of uses, and you don't know if you're going to have a shop here and apartments there and an office here. So there are no buffers downtown because you're not intending to create separation between uses, but rather architectural and use transition.
Sure, and that's regardless of what the zoning is? That's
Correct,
no
in any of the,
Okay.
of the downtown districts.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I was not aware of that. My second question, and can you actually go back to slide 7, please?
Sure.
And I really don't want to split hairs here, but one of the things that came up quite a bit in the public hearing was the fact that the applicant is proposing to build 5 units. I'm just wondering what the maximum would be given this rezoning versus the maximum under current conditions.
Sure. Well, if you take 0.19 acres and multiply that by 8 units per acre, that comes out to about 1.5. And then if you do 25 times 0.19, it's about 4.75.
So in that case, they would be able to build a maximum of 4, because you obviously couldn't build 0.75 townhomes.
I don't
Correct.
believe so.
Okay. And under the same logic, currently, you'd only be able to build 1 townhome, because obviously you couldn't build 1.75 townhomes as well. So really, townhomes would not be a pertinent use in this area, because you can't build 1 townhome and call it a townhome.
It would have to, the property would have to be combined with another property to get enough acreage to do an attached residential product.
Okay. That's all I got.
Okay, Chuck?
I have no question.
We'll just work our way down to Victor.
No, he's got married Chad.
Yeah, we're just slowly getting there.
Please.
I had that same question that Ryan had about the separation, but also curious about the wall or the fence that it might be going between that. Are there rules about that? Is that a I've not heard that come up before, but then my experience is limited, so I wondered if that's something that is routinely used as a separation device.
We've seen that in some cases. Landscaping has been more popular, but again, we're looking at downtown with less space. And Jason, do you have any comments on the fence or the wall?
Other than, that was a request that was made at the very first neighborhood meeting that we had, and that was a request for, I think it was called a giant wall at that point. But that is it has been a recurring theme. So the fence was in a direct response to a specific request from folks who live in that area.
Are there any design requirements, or does the town have any kind of guidelines or anything like that? That's all a part of what happens?
Certain materials and requirements, I don't have those right at my fingertips, but if you look around, we don't have ugly fences and walls around here, so hopefully it would be good.
That's all I have.
Great, thank you very much. Those are all good questions. You save a lot of things for me that I have to ask again. So, Mr. Barron, I didn't appreciate until this evening's presentation by you that this property here is actually in some way being comprehended as part of the condominium development up front. In all the other documentation in the earlier public hearings, I didn't understand how that was supposed to be an extension of. Can you just explain a little more clearly? And now that you've made the comment about it's not the same ownership, I'm trying to understand what you really mean by this property is somehow integrated or part of the plan facing Chatham Street.
Well, and again, my client has been working with the owners of that site to entitle this property such that they could fold this site into their development. What has been requested is up to, and as Mr. Eads points out, 4 and change units to be located on this site. Given the site's configuration and where its frontage is, it stands to reason, and you wouldn't be able to put 4 and change units on that site and serve it with access onto Urban Drive from this particular piece of property. And so our anticipation, my client's anticipation, is once this is entitled, that the adjacent developer will essentially fold that into their development, and there will be a single townhome building located on the site, essentially running perpendicular to Urban Drive, with its access coming off of the driveways, all being served internal to the condominium development that's going on to the north of the site.
Well, I'm glad you explained that because that did not come out at all earlier.
Well, and it wouldn't be obvious because, again, this is a standalone zoning case because it's the only piece that requires zoning in order for the overall development plan to work. And the development plan that has been submitted is not before you all for review and consideration. So I understand why it wouldn't be obvious from what has been submitted.
That's correct, but you've left to speculation by some people's parts that there's a driveway to get to 4 units kind of behind, and that's kind of worst case scenario. So there's a more holistic thought about how this property integrates with the condominium complex up front.
Unquestioned.
There was also someone who made a comment, if you could just verify, that there was a request by the last town council or a comment made about an expectation of having a site plan or something that has not been yet presented. Could you just...
There was a town council member...
Is that misunderstanding, or is that something that hasn't been delivered?
No, there was a town council member who requested that some sort of renderings be produced. We're just not at that stage in the game. I mean, given the concerns that we had heard with the adjacent community, as you're probably aware, the way that the land development process works is there's stages in the process, and you don't kind of get out over your skis. You don't start to invest in things like site plans until you know that you have a use that's permitted on the site, and that's the function of zoning, and that is to establish what uses can be put to the property. And so we're just not at that stage in the game. We appreciate why the request would be made, but it's just not where we are at this stage in the game.
Got it. So may I also just speculate here? So as the landowner for the development now, which is under planning review, facing Chatham, and now with this potential extension somehow being integrated into that in ways that have to be determined, is there additional plans that the additional properties there along Urban Drive down to Waldo, and maybe an additional property behind one of the condominiums are also looked forward to be integrated into this whole thing?
I'm not sure which site you're talking about. Are you talking heading towards Chatham or away from Chatham down to Waldo?
Down Urban to Waldo, just beyond the subject property, or the other property?
If there are plans along those lines, those are
you don't have. There's nothing in the works for those.
Nope, not to my knowledge.
Got it. Okay. All All right, that's really the extent of my questions.
May I go back to Mary Jo's question about the fence and the walls? Deborah Grannon was kind enough to give me some notes to help with that answer. She's let me know that fences and walls may not exceed 8 feet in height, and that's likely to keep things at a human scale, so you don't feel like you're walking by something too tall. And she said no electric items and no barbed wire, so that goes along with what I said about we don't have ugly
That's a relief.
things, so. Thank you.
Thank you.
So many things you could say about walls right now, but we will.
And she said we encourage the finished side of a wall or fence to face the adjacent property, so you're looking at the nicer side or the nicer facing of masonry if it ends up being something like that.
Thank you.
So it's going to be a beautiful wall.
Could I ask?
Yes, by all means.
High
I'm gonna ask you
expectations.
to repeat something that you've already explained on being dense.
Sure.
Just as far as setbacks, the setback requirement for the MDR, if this lot remains MDR, what would the setback requirement be?
Sure, the front setback was 10 feet or 18 if there's a driveway. And for the side, it's some combination that equals 16 feet between a group of buildings, and then the rear is 10 feet.
So there would be a substantial change. There are no setbacks?
No setbacks in MXD.
Okay.
I would like to ask a question about the historical significance, because it came up from someone in the public hearing, and in the staff report, we actually mentioned that. And if you would just explain for everyone else to hear what
Sure.
the
We made
case is with that.
a note of the age of the house in the staff report because a couple years ago, we started doing a historic inventory of properties around Cary. And one of my colleagues was the project manager for that, and I remember her telling me that if a property is at least 50 years old, it could be considered to be put on the historic resources inventory. That's just something for us to consider as we look at development, redevelopment, infill. So that the age of the house, yes, the neighborhood being built in the 40s and 50s does make it unique and special.
But it is not on the inventory.
It is not.
Okay. My other question is about MDR, MXD. There's an HDR in between, correct? There's another residential classification that allows for more density than MDR?
The
trying to
town
recall.
center zoning includes a couple different categories. There's an HDR mid-rise that includes attached, semi-detached townhomes and patio homes. There's an HDR garden. It's more like garden apartments. So that would be in between MXD and MDR. And there's also, I'm sorry, there's also an MXDR, which would be a mixed-density residential, which is a district where you could have, I believe that you could end up having an average of 15 units per acre with different housing types in it.
Okay, but the MXD, the 25 that we see here, is the highest density of those.
It's the same. I think it has, let's see. I believe that is, no, HMXD will let you go up to 50 units per acre. So that's the biggest category.
Okay. So I'd just like to ask a couple of questions of Mr. Barham regarding the zoning conditions. And I know we tend to sometimes think in terms of the market saying this and the market saying that, just purely in terms of what you would be allowed to do, not necessarily saying you're going to do it. But you would, under the current zoning, you would be permitted to let's just say 1.5 units. But the zoning conditions, none of which exist on that land right now, would fail to exist if this
That is right.
rezoning fails. So you would not be, if the owner were to develop this property under the zoning permitted uses available to the owner now, there would be no obligation to redirect stormwater runoff into the other project, but it would go into the normal runoff for that parcel on, I believe, the fronting street, as opposed to going up on Urban Drive. So it would just
Yes, that's
go there.
a condition that has been offered voluntarily by the applicant in this case.
No fence. There would be no masonry, the other architectural standards that are offered up as a zoning condition would not exist, and it would just be whatever the ordinance permits.
Right, and right now, the ordinance doesn't have any requirements for townhome buildings. The General Assembly has said local governments don't have the ability to enforce architectural requirements with respect to single-family and townhome buildings. So that actually is a very important condition as it relates to this particular case.
So just to clarify the sort of the place in this puzzle of these zoning conditions are that there would be a rezoning that would allow greater density, but attached to that rezoning would be conditions that otherwise would not exist should this rezoning fail and the owner just decide they're going to develop the property anyway. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that fair to say? Okay. That's the only question I had. Does anyone else have any other questions? Well, thank you for answering those for me, sir. All right, well, if no one has any other questions of the staff, does anyone have a motion in mind they would like to put on the floor?
I'll put a motion
No?
on the floor.
Okay.
To get us started. I move that the board forward case number 17 REZ07 to the town council with a recommendation for denial. While it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, denial is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
There's a motion to deny. Is there a second for that motion? Start us off, Dan.
I'll cut to the chase and I'll tell you why I vote to deny this. And others can agree, disagree, they may disagree. They may agree for different reasons, but it's this. The time has come and the time is now. And I say that in response to when the director of planning stood before us and we were talking about the Eastern Gateway. And I asked a question about one of the components of the Eastern Gateway, we were asked to review that earlier, was going to be the displacement of a significant amount of housing in an effort to, in that development. And I think about that, and so I asked him a question about that, and he said at that time, we'll deal with it when the time comes. And I think the time's now. Because what we're seeing in downtown is gentrification. And overall, I think that's great. Everybody loves the amenities that are being developed and all that will come with it. But there's still this unanswered question as to, okay, so with every action, there's a reaction. And so we begin looking at and we're seeing developers looking to be able to put together sites, development sites. We see townhomes being built. We see condominiums. But I'm looking at, when we talk about housing choices, not being just single-family, townhomes, condos, whether it be modern, neoclassical design, brick or hardy plank. It's about choices for everybody. And one of the gaps that we have is the housing choices for all the citizens of Cary. And in this area of downtown, we know that it's a mixed income neighborhood, which is one way to look at it, both in terms of ownership as well as rental, and owners who are what I'd call in, workforce housing, and so we're not addressing that piece of that. And so I see this as that first case that's coming before us with somebody's asking for a rezoning, as we have, various zoning in that area, and we know how this is going to go. It's, and this is a perfect example. We have a high density, and can we get the mixed density next to it? Next thing will be the LDR, so on and so forth that's there. And we don't have an answer to the question of what happens on the displacement side. Now, I totally see where the market's going, and that's fine. But as a town, we haven't come up with that plan for the options. We have policy statements in the community plan, but they're just statements. It's the same thing as having housing choices, and that can be defined any which way. And we have projects coming in the Eastern Gateway. We have IKEA, where the average wage is $12 to $14 an hour. We have the other project that's coming in that will come before us. But in that project, even as we talk about, live, work, and play, I don't see any provisions being made for the people who are going to work there, where they're going to live there. That's not going to be an option for them. And I think until we look at this from a broader perspective and say, we have a great plan, and I think as one of the speakers said, you know, sometimes we need to tweak the plan, or at least even go into the next level or two with what the plan talked about, and begin addressing that. And I think downtown is the place that needs to be addressed, and in the Eastern Gateway. And I see that this is a perfect case of beginning to look at, you know, okay, what's going to happen. You know, it's interesting because we had, at my Rotary Club on Friday, we had a presentation on this, and one of the questions that came up was, what about the people who live downtown? And because as we're doing work in the community down there. And afterwards, I had several members of my Rotary Club come up and ask me about, yeah, so if all, this is all great going on downtown, but what about the folks we're working with who live in those little 1,000-square-foot bungalows? Maybe they rent, maybe they own, and, you know, what's happening to some of the multifamily that's down there? And it's just that, you know, we may see it as being the displacement. And so I'm voting no on this one, not so much on the 0.19 acres on the parcel itself, but it's more of the policy issue. That this is the first one that's coming before us, and it's a policy question that hasn't been addressed. It's only alluded to in the community plan. And I don't think we can really go forward and make intelligent decisions till we address all aspects of it. So as Jeff almost said that night, we'll deal with it when the time comes, and I'm just feeling as though, okay, the time's here. Let's deal with it. And let's deal with displacement of housing and housing options for all. You know, for home ownership opportunities, whether they be $500,000 townhomes, whatever, but also all the folks who are in that other end of the spectrum who want ownership of opportunities, and also are now going to have to be forced to find other places to live, whether they be here in Cary, whether they be in Wake County or other counties, but they'll be moving here. They'll still be not moving here, but they'll be still commuting to here to serve our needs. So that's why I'm opposing it.
I seconded it because I really do have a problem with the transition. I mean, I can imagine downtown Cary being somewhere where you can walk to restaurants and people can socialize and having that type of an atmosphere. It just feels like there isn't enough buffer or transition there, and you're just kind of jamming a townhouse in a neighborhood. So that's why I second it.
Thank you. Anyone else on this side want to speak to this motion? Steve?
This is a difficult one, and I would tend to also vote to deny, but my reasoning is maybe a little bit different. I agree with the transition, but also this seems, I would like to have postponed this more than even rejected or approved it, because I'm really hung up on how it's tied into the adjacent development, and it just seems that that's going to completely change this. And I would have liked to looked at those together. I realize we have to talk about this zoning today. That's what we're here for. But it was just brought up repeatedly, and because of that, I'm having a hard time letting go of it. And about that, I'm also concerned about the transition. I also respect the fact that a landowner is trying to do something with their property, and I do want to, you know, I do have empathy towards that. And then lastly, there's really nothing that's going to stop this development downtown. It is going to happen, and I think we need to watch it and just make sure that what's going down there transitions properly, you know, to the existing neighborhood. And hopefully, if it does that, values can possibly even go up, like they have at Cameron Village and, you know, some other developments similar to this. But for right now, just based on what I see here today, I would vote to deny.
Might as well finish out this side of the table.
Why not? I agree with everything that's been said. I do think that it does present some bit of uncertainty, not really knowing what's going on with the larger development next door. The developer has the right to obviously come in with the site plan and not go through rezoning there, but it would be, I guess, more advantageous to kind of have a bigger picture to understand fully what's going on there. I will commend the applicant, though, on adding the conditions. That's something we're starting to see a little more of, but I really like an applicant listening to residents in a public hearing before council and adding conditions that address some of those, specifically the stormwater. One of the things that came up quite a bit during the council public hearing was the issues with stormwater, and I like to see that the applicant did add a condition to address that. I think that shows good faith on their part, and I do want to commend them for that. Really the big thing for me, taking it down to the detail level, is the numbers. I don't think having a development with no requirement for setback is adequate here. I don't think it's fair for the neighbors, having no buffer, no setback. What I would like to also see is some type of condition or something if the applicant wants to provide it there to address that need, because I just don't think it's fair for those people that live in that area now to just plop this in there. Though I do say townhomes probably is a good use for the land. I do kind of see what the applicant's saying with that transition there. It just needs a little more with the setbacks and kind of providing that separation between the existing.
We'll just keep on heading this
Yeah,
way.
I would vote to deny also. I think the MDR designation for this particular tract is appropriate. I think it's the highest and best use for the particular tract. And the setbacks are probably the big deal for me, going from 0 to some reasonable and significant setbacks. And I also think that in doing the plan, that there was a fair amount of thought given where to strike the balance between the MXD and the MDR. I don't think it was done willy-nilly, and I'd like to respect the plan as it was originally done, and don't see an overwhelming reason to change that.
Mary Jo?
This is a little bit of a struggle. I think all the logic that's been presented so far makes a lot of sense. I'm intrigued by the mention of Cameron Village, because I think that is a pretty good example of where you've seen a lot of high-rise and dense activity going on down there that could easily derail anybody's vision of it being a nice place to live, and yet you have all that little small 1 or 2 story max other housing around there that still is in great shape, and people are anxious to live there because it's walkable, because it's all the things that we've said we want to do in downtown Cary. So the transition is an issue, and I know that that's kind of scary to see the difference in size between these bungalows. That's a great word. 1 story to all of a sudden go up. At the same time, I think there's been an effort made to address a lot of the concerns that the neighbors had, and that is commendable. So I'm not sure that I'm convinced one way or the other that I can vote against it. I think it's a desirable part of town to be walkable, and people are going to enjoy being in that part of town. But I certainly empathize with the concerns of the neighbors who have a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. So I'm to be convinced.
Might as well finish out this side.
I'm going to support the motion, and I have a little different point of view. I really do wish the whole project had a little bit more holistic view of not just the additional lot here, but perhaps a few more of the lots here as well, and I'll explain. I've lived in one community in California where you would have homes of this vintage torn down, a multi-million-dollar McMansion built, townhomes built, little home, this, that, whatever, and very hodgepodge of use was allowed to develop lot by lot by lot. And that, ultimately, that's not good as a living environment. But I do recall a very good example when I lived in California about a commercial district which had a development plan for, facing the commercial district, some high-level condominiums, 3 or 4 stories, much like this, and the developer actually facing the word's a good one here, heritage neighborhood-like area, pre-war and post-war type of homes. By virtue of developing on the whole block, they had the high elevations facing the commercial districts, the main throughway, but in the very back, they were able to eventually slope down to single-family level proportions for the townhomes and such, facing the traditional heritage neighborhood. And it actually got a lot of support from the neighborhood, which before was quite negative. This plan looks like it's halfway towards being a good plan. With regard to that slice of along Urban Drive, high up front, and it could get low, but by virtue of just piecemealing it right now, we're not getting the whole story, which was why I was asking the question. Maybe there was some good news with plans about acquiring some of these other properties. And I know if a developer was to look at this more holistically, more likely to find more value in the total development, and therefore perhaps more property value potential for the current homeowners or property owners as well. So as I look at this, I actually want more townhomes down home. I want more choices of homes. I want more people walking downtown like Mary Jo. But this plan just seems like half a plan to not only do what we want to do and also be sympathetic to the neighborhood around. And I'll just end with, I'll tell you, with regard to the whole special planning area of downtown Cary, I mean, if we had to make decisions here as a planning and zoning board by 0.19 acres for each rezoning, we're going to be on 40-year Plan 3 before we get it done. This is just not the way to go about planning. This is just taking it and swinging at it. So I would really encourage the developer, which has made a great effort here with the condominiums facing Chatham, to maybe think more holistically if that's even possible, because I'd like to have a chance to reconsider this and something more exciting for downtown.
I am going to be the proverbial salmon swimming upstream. Honestly, this looked very good to me for a number of reasons. First of all, let's take the status quo right now. There's low-density residential on the slide that we're looking at right now. This MDR actually is a transition between the MXD to the northwest, and then the lower density on Waldo. So keeping it as is at MDR actually is theoretically a transition. I'm going to assume, and this is purely an assumption on my part, that when these zonings were attached to the buildings that fronted Urban Drive, they were given the MDRs, and the MXDs were given to the parcels that fronted Chatham Street. And that's why we see what we see. And if you're looking at the slide right now, there's two sort of stick out like a sore thumb colors that don't match. And one is the parcel we're considering, and the other one is where the letters DR for Urban Drive are. And I assume that parcel fronts Urban Drive, so it got an MDR. But if somebody were to take a couple of those surrounding parcels and develop them, it would just make sense. You would want to bring that one in and have the same kind of thing we're doing today. 3 parcels do not need to be rezoned, 1 does. I've sat on this in this chair and heard other board members say, I will not do a piecemeal rezoning. I want to see how this incorporates into the other areas. That's what we got here. I'm a big believer in zoning conditions, and I think these zoning conditions tried really hard to incorporate that other property who has absolutely, he doesn't have to do anything that that other townhome or larger multifamily development has to do. They're under no obligation to do any of this, but they're going to offer their, I assume, their stormwater management BMP pond to allow the water to go in and from this development. So there were all these ways of building that in to the existing project that would be the least impact to the surrounding neighborhood. I'm a little confused about point number 3, the townhome. The one townhome on the end will have the primary entrance, yet I thought I heard from the applicant that all the townhomes will be accessible from within the driving structure of the other development, which I thought would have been awesome. I mean, there's your buffer there, or not buffer, so to speak, but there's your transition to the other neighborhood. I thought that this kind of thing would fit pretty well. Apparently, I'm not in the majority on this one, so it is what it is. The only other thing I'll mention is, you know, hey, I have no idea about who owns what lots or whatever, but if this lot stays MDR and the lot to the south, they decide they want to sell, then you're going to see 4 townhomes go in there because they can do it right now if they wanted to with those 2 lots, as we heard before, and they can go to 45 feet if they want to. That exists under MDR. So if a couple of those parcels bundle and suddenly it is enough to put a couple of townhomes in, it's not coming to us. It's going right into the pipeline. So just be careful what you wish for here. And like I said, that may never happen, but it's just one of those things that I wanted to point out. And that's all I'll say on this. Does anyone else have anything else that they want to say? If not, would all those in favor of the motion to deny, please say aye and raise your hand so I can count them out.
Aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed to deny, raise your hand and say no. That would just be me. No. Okay. So it.
You can say no twice, but still one vote.
I was looking at Mary Jo because she was on the fence, and then I was alone on the fence. But okay, so this motion to deny passes by 7-1. So the rezoning has been denied. That's the recommendation we'll take forward to council. Thank you very much. Ms. Gruber, thank you. We will now move to a case that does not have a public hearing, and that is 17 REZ 08. Similar rules, just not as many, nothing about people coming down to speak, but we're going to hear from the staff, we'll hear from the applicant for 10 minutes, and then from that point on, we will work on the case with applicant and staff. Good evening, Ms. Gren.
Good evening. This is a request to rezone approximately 2.8 acres located in the 9400 block of Chapel Hill Road. Subject property is highlighted here in yellow. The existing zoning on the subject property is a combination of residential 20 and the yellow is residential 12. So two different zoning districts. It's an assemblage of several parcels of land. The growth framework map is traditional neighborhood, and traditional neighborhood does allow a variety of zoning districts, including R12, R8, transitional residential, residential multifamily, and planned development district, and allows a variety of housing uses, including attached residential and small-scale multifamily. The applicant is proposing a zoning district of transitional residential conditional use, so an allowable zoning district within the growth framework map. And they're proposing to limit the use to semi-detached and attached dwellings and/or townhomes and neighborhood recreation. So this shows you some of the development that's occurring in the vicinity of the property. As you can see with the Park West townhomes and the Silver Grove townhomes, the request is in keeping in terms of what's happening completely surrounding this area. There's no stream buffers on the site according to Cary's most recent GIS maps, and field determination of that will be determined at the time of site plan. The Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Facilities Master Plan shows that there is a future street side trail required along the frontage of the subject property along Chapel Hill Road. So this is something the applicant would be responsible for providing, assuming this goes forward to a development plan. And again, the proposed zoning transitional residential conditional use. Chapel Hill Road is a thoroughfare, and road improvements would also be required here. This shows the notification of the adjacent parcels. At the neighborhood meeting, there was one attendee in addition to the applicants, and their questions related to how does this impact my property? What are the development opportunities for the adjacent parcel? There were, at the time of the town council public hearing, only one phone call was from a nearby property owner who was very concerned about pedestrian safety on Chapel Hill Road and the need for road improvements. So staff was able to explain that the responsibility for road improvements is recognized when we see new development, and we put the responsibility on applicants to both dedicate right-of-way, widen the road, and install that street side trail. At the town council meeting, there was one council member who had a question for the applicant related to the possible inclusion of an adjacent parcel. So there's a parcel that's sort of left R40. That citizen has been talking to the town and to the applicant about how to go through the rezoning process, but at this time they have not submitted an application. And this shows you the current conditions out here on the site. This is the subject property. As you can see, this area is truly ready to have some redevelopment and have some road improvements. There's no sidewalk in this area, so all of that's going to come assuming we do get this rezoning approved and development moving forward. As we looked at the request, the staff did a preliminary analysis and saw that there are several policies in the Cary Community Plan where this does apply and comply. It would provide more variety with housing choices in this area, does facilitate a redevelopment, an infill development, provides appropriate transitions, especially since it's so similar to a lot of the adjacent rezoning, and the single-family residential detached in the vicinity is separated from this proposal by a large stream buffer area, and it also facilitates infrastructure improvements. So staff's preliminary recommendation is for approval of the proposed rezoning request. So this concludes staff's presentation, and then after the applicant's comments, I'll be available for your questions.
Thank you. We'll hear from the applicant now.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. My name is Glenda Top with Glenda S. Top and Associates, and I'm here tonight representing the property owners. Ms. Grannon did an excellent job, so I'm going to do something very different and probably talk very little tonight, which is unusual for me, but I figured I'm here to answer questions. Just to reiterate, the property is located in the traditional neighborhood category. The predominant land use type does include attached townhomes. There was that map that showed what's being developed adjacent to the property. The owner of this property, or the owners of this property, were part of the ownership of the adjacent townhomes. This is going to be a second phase of that. There was no one at the public hearing. There was the one question about that one outlying parcel. There is interest, but as we pointed out to that property owner, we had already begun the process, and to stop would mean withdrawing and then getting a waiver. So that is something that is being discussed. This is an area within the Cary Community Plan that does identify a corridor for redevelopment. As pointed out, with this, there will be a sidewalk, there will be road improvements. And when we talk about a redevelopment in an area, and with all the growth that we are seeing out here with the new homes, we do believe that this will further enhance the viability of that section of Cary. And also it is, again, as staff pointed out in your staff report, if you look at the various policies that are identified, we do fit quite a few of those in terms of providing a housing option that appears to be very suitable out here. The transitions are appropriate given what has developed. And if you look at the different zoning classifications that have been approved by the town out here, you will see that most of them have been transitional residential. Given the size of the parcel and the classification, the maximum number of units that can be on this site is 17. So with that, I will conclude. Just in summary, the request does comply with the growth framework map, the policies of the Cary Community Plan, and we would ask for the board's support. I do have an engineer with me here tonight if you have technical questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions of the staff or the applicant? Yes.
For the applicant, just to reconfirm, I believe it's the intent, but this new rezoning request would present a development that would be contiguous to the property. So it's going to be integrated in with, streets and sidewalks. So it's going to new residents here, it's all going to look like one holistic planned neighborhood, short of the one little spot there that's still TBD.
Right. I know that I'll probably get stopped by staff or the attorney here, but you are correct in looking at the layout. We are looking at, sharing things like the post box, the mailbox, the kiosk and stuff. So yes, it's intended to be integrated with the development that is adjacent.
Does that mean it's the same developer and same whatever, or is it? Just
None of that is a zoning condition.
I'm just trying to understand how it's integrated.
That's intended. Right, but
That's
it's
all I
not
need to know.
intended, but not guaranteed, because anything could change in terms of ownership.
Just trying to understand.
But currently, it is the same ownership.
Got it. And with the obligation for road improvements that are on the, I guess it's the east side of Chapel Hill Road that are already occurring as a result of the existing development, with this proposed development, short of the one little notch that still remains TBD, those will all be developed. So that notch in the middle, let's say that just remains.
It leaves a gap.
As it is forever. We're going to have a little notch there.
It leaves the
that's
gap
not
until
developed.
it comes in as part of a development plan, or if at some point in time, the town occasionally will do a gap analysis report and look at capital projects. Right now, there's nothing for that spot.
We don't like gaps, but that's a TBD for the future. And of course, none of this has any implications on the widening for the other side of the road to any of those properties.
Right, the only responsibility is for road improvements on the property frontage on their side of the street.
I knew that, just wanted to double check. Okay, thank you, that's all the questions I have.
Anyone else on this side of the room?
Could I see, I think it was slide 43, the one where it shows the existing development that's in that area? Oh, not that.
44. You were close.
So these green things, the green spaces are already finished, or?
They're under construction.
Okay,
Yeah,
in
these are all
progress.
under construction. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it?
Yes.
I have no questions.
Yes, I have a question. In the staff report, one of the things that I noticed that kind of concerned me a little was the fact that there is a historical structure that's located on the Cary Architectural Historical Resource Inventory. And I'm starting to note this on several staff reports now, is that in your analysis, you said that the subject property is not a preservation priority. I realize that there are, and I'm guessing the reason for that is there are a lot of these types of houses along that corridor.
Yeah.
My question is, what is the criteria that's used there, and is that being applied to all rezonings?
Absolutely. What we do is we talk to the Historic Preservation Office with the state and ask them to evaluate it. We look at whether or not there have been significant changes to the structure, the size of the structure. You can't save every parcel, every house.
Right.
So we do try to look at priorities. This is in such close proximity to the Nancy Jones house across the street. That would be a prime example of a priority structure that we would really want to push an applicant hard, you know, to take that into consideration. It's a 1945 bungalow, you know, post-World War II structure that it's quaint, it's charming, but it does not have huge historic significance compared to something, you know, like the Jones house, like the Nancy Jones house. Mhm.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Sure.
I'm good. This is fairly straightforward to me.
Okay, just hand the baton down to the right.
I just have a quick question. The adjoining properties that are zoned residential, what's the buffer requirement between those two?
So
Between the
if-
TRCU and the R20 and the R12?
If you have a townhome development going adjacent to single-family detached on large acre lots, meaning 8,000 square feet or greater, there's a 40-foot buffer requirement.
Okay.
And if this is already developed, if these lots are already developed, as they have been with a single-family detached structure, the burden of responsibility falls on the developer. If this were vacant property that was being developed, then they'd share the buffer requirement and they'd each do half of it. But when you've already got an existing detached residential home and a townhome development's proposed to go next to it, in this district, they would have to provide the full buffer.
Okay, so the developer in this case with asking for the TRCU, they're going to bear the burden, if you will, or the responsibility is a better way to put it, the responsibility for the 40-foot buffer.
That is correct, unless before they start the development project, if some of these other properties come in and become part of the assemblage or rezone to something less than 8,000 square feet, then the buffer requirement's reduced.
Okay.
And then there's a 50-foot streetscape required on Chapel Hill Road.
Right, okay, thank you. 'Cause I know that the stream buffer in the rear of the existing TRCU, it ends somewhere, yeah, back in there, doesn't run the entire way, but.
Right, exactly.
Just trying to see where that would end and what else.
Good question, yep.
Okay, thanks. That's it for me.
I don't have any questions. I think this is pretty straightforward, given the area.
Okay. I just have one question, and this slide is a perfect one to keep up. You just mentioned some of the R20s have been developed.
I mean, there's houses on them already.
Houses on them.
Right.
Those road frontages are not at the final stage where they would be if they were to be redeveloped,
If they
correct?
were redeveloped and it requires a development plan, then they would have to provide a streetscape. That's correct. Or widen the road or dedicate additional right-of-way. That is correct.
So it's not just that one R40 parcel.
Here, right.
That is the choke point. The R20s to the west and to the east there also are unimproved.
At this time.
Would be the way to put it. Okay.
Correct.
All right. That's the only other question I had. So, no other questions? Does
I'll be
someone
glad
have a
to make
motion in mind?
be glad to make a motion. I'd like to move that the board forward case number 17 REZ 18 to the town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons discussed.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion on that?
Just very little. I mean, this area is, I think it's in need of some improvement. This is consistent with the adjacent rezonings. It's unfortunate that one little parcel there is still under discussion. Hopefully it'll be integrated soon, but I just think this will be a big improvement for the area, so I support it.
Thank you. Chuck, anything else?
I would agree with that. It seems to be consistent with the surrounding area, and obviously it's going to fit in with the adjoining property.
Any other discussion on this motion? Then would all in favor say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed say no. That is a unanimous carry at 8-0. That concludes our cases for this evening. We do have some other work to do. The first of which, by the way, it's 8:11. I think we're okay to press on for a little bit. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
First item of business here is to appoint a vice chairperson. So we would open up for any nominations. Should anyone have a person in mind?
I'll make a nomination. I'd like to continue with the services of our current vice chairman, so I'd like to renominate Ryan for the position.
Okay. Any other nominees for the vice chair? Going once? All right. We'll consider that a motion.
It's a motion.
Second.
So then there's
Do you
a
need a
second.
second? Okay.
Why not? Might as well just,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure I do or not, which is why we need a vice chairman for when I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, you have it.
So all in favor of Brian serving as our vice chair for this coming year, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope, nobody opposed? Okay, great.
I wanted to see how he voted.
Just checking. So that
He was
unanimous.
hesitant. I watched him.
So now we switch to the 2017-18 board work plan. So for those who aren't familiar with, maybe some folks outside, every year the board puts together a set of goals. They are fairly, I don't want to say generic, but they're a fairly straightforward listing of goals. Last year's say things like we will make recommendations to council on amendments to the comprehensive plan, land development ordinance text, and we'll adjudicate our portion of zoning and rezoning cases, and then some other things as necessary. We do have the obligation to create a new work plan going forward, and that's typically done in a work session, but it just so happens that our first opportunity to kick this topic around comes at this meeting. So we'll do that. We will probably carry this into a work session where we will hammer everything out, and then we'll approve it at the next meeting, most likely. I believe that's what the plan is at this point, or perhaps even approve it at the work session. So, Victor, I believe you wanted to move.
So
do you have anything you'd like to?
Do we have to approve or say something about this, or we'll just defer it to the work session?
Or we can
I'm good.
talk about it now if you like.
I'm good with that.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to say anything about this item before we just table it for the work session? I don't think we have to make a motion or anything like that for it. It'll just move to our work session. The next item, final item we have is the calendar for 2018, board year 2018, which starts in January. And we received a working calendar from our town clerk's office. Typically, our work sessions are on the third, I believe, Monday of, yes, the third Monday of every month, and our regular meeting such as this is on the fourth Monday. Every now and then we have some changes to that schedule, which will be published online when we approve it. I'm not going to read through it right now. But for the work session and regular meetings, does anyone see a schedule conflict or anything you would like to change? Because we could certainly entertain that now. Is everyone okay with the schedule as written?
I don't see anything wrong with the schedule as written. As some of you may know, or if you've read your email, I've had few questions about work sessions. And as we set a schedule for 2018, unlike last year, we had a schedule for all this year. And, as you may know, as of October, 10 months of the year, we've only had 2 work sessions that have occurred, as opposed to 6 in 2016. We may have 2 more in November, December, so if we hit 4, we'll be running half of what we did in 2016. So I just throw it out there as we raise a question about our schedule. You know, I'm new to the board as of a year ago. I came with expectations that when we approve this schedule, that's something that we are going to commit to and arrange our personal and professional lives to attend. But given the frequency of work sessions actually occurring, and for a lot of good reasons, perhaps agenda topics didn't exist with regards to the staff and planning and so forth, they didn't happen. So I'm a little, curious about, accepting a plan when sessions don't occur, given I believe we actually have a number of topics to discuss, maybe even going back to May, where we haven't had work sessions to discuss, at least my view within the Planning and Zoning Board, from some of our other topics that have come up and so forth. So I'm struggling with accepting an agenda where we expect to have work sessions, yet we don't have the work sessions.
So is it a matter of, if a work session is on the schedule, we should have it? Or is it a matter of, if we're not going to have them all the time, should we have them bi-monthly rather than monthly for scheduling?
Well, on one hand, if we're not going to have November, December sessions, let's just cancel them right now for our 2017, given that we haven't had one since May. But if we think we're going to have them, great. But likewise for 2018, if we're going to have them, let's have them. Because for some folks, I don't know about you, I have to adjust personal and professional travel and other commitments and so forth. And if we get a cancellation just a week or so in advance, I can't go back and rewrite my or other people's commitments to make a date happen, because these meetings are very important for me, as I'm sure for all of you. So I'm just struggling a little bit, and perhaps this would be a work session topic if we're going to have a work session. I don't know that to be the case.
Yeah, and I'll point something else out in Victor's defense here, that folks who might be watching this don't realize. As board members, we have attendance obligations. So if we miss more than a certain number of meetings, we have to be reevaluated for whether we can continue on our term, even if it's in the middle of our term. So the town takes our attendance seriously, and therefore the shoe should also sit on the other foot just as tightly.
Well, I'm happy to get a bye week, as I'm sure anybody else is, for maybe dinner at home or something else. That's great. But if it goes on, as I said, looking at this year, 2 meetings to October, that's 20% of the months, versus last year there were 6 meetings, 60% of the months. I'm seeing a change. Now, I understand from Alan and some other folks, and I just learned this today, that maybe my expectations are wrong with regard to work sessions frequency based on past scenarios, prior years. They don't occur every month. Although, since I started last September, they were every month until about February, maybe 1 month missing. So I got into that mindset, some mea culpa if that's how I saw it. But we've had emails back and forth about some other topics, and we think they could be work session topics, but we don't ever get to do a work session. So I hate to be bringing this laundry out here, but I'm just going to pass for all of your benefit here. And I'll give one to Alan over here as well.
By the way, the Alan we're referring to is Alan Kane, our acting planning director, who's in attendance with this.
And by no means do I want to discuss this evening, but I just want to point out, it's not clear to me, perhaps just to others of you, how work session agendas get set, how the timing of having them or not having them get set. Maybe there is a process to do that. It's not clear to me, so it could just be me. But, we just get them canceled, and we don't have a chance to put inputs into maybe things we would like to discuss, in addition to things the staff would like to discuss. So I just gave 8 things here. The first 2 things are actually things on the list here, which have had email discussions about going back to July, that I thought they might be some work session, but they did not happen. So again, I don't want to rat hole into all of this. This is a perfectly good work session discussion, but we have to have a work session to discuss work sessions.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too far out on a limb here, because I'll be going outside of my expertise as well. But in our experience, I believe we're the 2 longest serving guys on the board right now. This has been sort of anomalous, having as many work sessions as we've had, because we were putting out the Cary community plan. Typically, we have as many canceled as we have And in fact, you'll find town council also has quite a few. But I see Alan Kane, our acting planning director, at the podium, and I think he's about to remind me that I am speaking outside of my expertise.
Not at all, Mr. Chair. I'm just going back to Mr. Varney's comment about whether or not we might have a work session in November. I think from staff's perspective, there will be a work session in November. Good. And we have a number of items on the agenda, one of which is a second LDO Act amendment. And so those are typical. That's a typical purpose for having the work session, but we also have a presentation scheduled for Eastern Cary Gateway from staff, among other things, which includes the discussion about 2018 work session topics. So from staff's perspective, November's a go, assuming the board wants to go.
Well, those are already in the calendar for 2017, so we're committed.
Yeah, well, we make no, we make no assumptions. We're just, I do think there is an opportunity to discuss about process, about establishing work sessions when they cancel, how we might go about canceling them, that we can certainly improve upon that process. But we're good to go for November.
Well, I would certainly like to also in the work session discuss how the Planning and Zoning Board may, if you will, have perhaps input as well into agenda topics that we might want that help us in doing our job better as Planning and Zoning Board, and our job, as we represent the community as well. So I'd hope it would be a two-way street, that maybe we have some topics. And right now, it's not apparent how we get those topics in. Even emails about topics don't seem to result in work sessions or agendas on work sessions.
So I think
it's an area for improvement. This is not a critique on anybody.
Sure.
It's meant to be an area for improvement.
We'll be there in November.
Good. All right. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, if everyone has had opportunity to look at the schedule. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I actually have a question for Lisa before we proceed. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, on our schedule that we see before us now, we're showing our work session starting at 6 p.m. I believe those normally start at 6:30, but those have a separate notice, correct? So we would not be binding ourselves to that time via approving the schedule, correct?
Tonight, we're just asking for your input on the schedule, I believe.
Okay.
And so that's actually a good point. What time do you all want to start work sessions? They're not televised, so from that standpoint, I think the timing, is a little more flexible than the televised meetings, which we've kind of got down at 6:30. So I think 6 or 6:30 could probably work for the work sessions, and it would be whatever you all think works best, and then we can report back to Jenny Johnson and see if she's okay with a time change. So if she put 6 o'clock down, okay.
Our preference would be 6.
Okay. So if you all kind of want to come to consensus on a starting time for work sessions for next year.
Of course, that requires me to remember 2 numbers now.
We'll call you.
Show up to this meeting at 6.
We'll call you.
Probably she did that. Council's meetings are set up that way. The town council meetings are 6:30, but their work sessions typically start at 6. So that may be where those numbers came from for you all as well.
Okay.
But for the November 2017 meeting that we already committed to,
It's whatever time is already on your calendar.
we'll be starting at the time that's already on our calendar.
Yes.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
Right.
And you will be adding an agenda item to talk about work sessions in the work session.
That will be there.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thanks for clarifying.
as far as other calendar input, is everyone pretty much okay with the calendar? So, I mean, we have time to go back and look at our own calendars and make sure everything's fine.
I have one question, and it goes along with something you said a few minutes ago about the frequency of the work sessions. As they've been canceled, as Victor pointed out, has there been any discussion on having them bi-monthly is what you said, but quarterly even, just thinking about that kind of a schedule just for our work sessions?
That's something we could kick around at the meeting,
Yeah.
I suppose, but I don't know if there's a statutory obligation for that or not. I'm about to find out.
No, there's nothing in the statutes. I'll just make one point, and then coming from my perspective on LDO amendments, so the text amendments to the zoning ordinance. One reason that we have them scheduled just every month is that sometimes we don't exactly know our schedules. And for example, we need you to have your work session on Act 2 in November, or else you're going to miss your chance. So it needs to precede your meeting where you're going to hear the topic and give your recommendation. So if we didn't have one scheduled for November, either we would have to delay our amendment, which causes problems for some things we're trying to do, or or you just wouldn't have a work session on it. So that's one reason that they're just scheduled every month, because, you know, we can't tell you right now in 2018 exactly what's going to be happening, what LDO amendments are going to be out there, or what other topics we may need to talk to you about. So that's one reason they've just been put on for every month, kind of with the knowledge that, yeah, you know, we're going to cancel some because we're going to be in a month where we don't have those things popping up on the radar.
Makes perfect sense.
Is there anything else about the schedule, work sessions, or any of those things? Yeah.
I don't have any question about work session. I think there's been some good points made, but one date, on March the 26th, we have a meeting scheduled. And I guess I would just encourage staff to try to tread lightly on the agenda items, particularly depending on which teams are in the NCAA basketball finals that night. So that's my only request, but the game usually starts at 9:30, so hopefully our chairperson will move us through sprightly.
Right.
Well, for the
That's my only
record,
comment.
I went to Penn State, so we could go all night. I never have to worry about it.
And I'd like to second his motion.
I would support it too.
Anything else on the schedule, or anything? There's no motions in order at all, or anything like that, so we'll just call a close to old and new business. And we will have our final input on the schedule at the next time we get together, which is going to be that work session. So I don't know that anything else is existing for us to talk about, so a motion to adjourn would get us out of here.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you and good night.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.